October 1995. Still working as a picture framer at Illyria Arts in Penfield, Ohio. And I believe in the last video I mentioned that I was a volunteer for the local blood bank. And the reason I brought that up before was so I could talk a little bit about it now. I realized that the comic book store I was going to, The Keep in Amherst, Ohio, had a pretty large and regular customer base. And so I suggested to the folks at the blood bank they might want to have a blood drive at the comic book shop. And they set it all up. And they had the blood drive. I was a volunteer. I wore a ghost face mask. It was in October, so it was all Halloweeny. It was written up in the local newspaper. And of course, they said, vampires getting blood at local comic book store. And I met a woman there who worked for the blood bank. We started going out. And she had a son. And this was around the time that Toy Story came out. And Burger King, I believe it was Burger King, had these Toy Story puppets that were like this big. And you put your fingers like in these holes behind the legs so you could make them walk. And she bought a Buzz Lightyear for her son, and she bought one for me that I wish I still had because it was put together backwards. His face and his ass were facing the same way. But anyway, little anecdote there. So yeah, volunteering for the blood bank. I think they did a blood drive at the comic book store at least twice, maybe more. I don't remember. That was cool. I really liked that comic store. They are now the game store that I go to. And started dating somebody for a few months. But you're not here for that. You're here for the books. Not a lot in October of 1995. Looks like just 5. And the first one was The Trickster by Muriel Gray. This was her debut horror novel. And the main character is this guy, Sam Hunt. He lives in some cold wasteland, and there's some ancient evil buried under the ground that's about to erupt. My mother bought this and read it, and at the time said it was like the scariest book she'd ever read. So I borrowed it and read it, and I said it was fine. I was like, it's all right. I may have to go back and reread it and see if I change my opinion. If my mom still has a copy of it, I may reread this book. To me, it was just a generic horror story. But you never know. Maybe I was in the wrong mood for it. Maybe I was correct. I'll have to take a look sometime and find out. But that's The Trickster by Muriel Gray. It's pretty popular. When I looked it up on Amazon, there's a 20th anniversary edition with a foreword by Mark Millar, or Miller, however you want to say it. The guy that created Kick-Ass and a bunch of the Kingsman, bunch of great comic book stuff. Not sure why he was chosen to write the foreword for it, but whatever. I like his comics. So again, like I said, it must be pretty popular. Book number 2, Iron Man: The Armor Trap by Greg Cox, an original novel, although seemingly similar to the Iron Man story from back in the 70s, the Iron Man novel. In this, Tony Stark is kidnapped. Rhodey, James Rhodes, as War Machine, has to try and find him and save him. And the people that have kidnapped him want him to build armor for them. I thought this was fine. It was a fine story. When it comes to things like novels based on comics, some people do okay. They write a decent story. It's entertaining. I don't feel like I wasted my time. Some people knock it out of the park. This is in the former category. It was fine. If I don't have a copy of it now, if I find a copy, I'll pick it up. I may give it another chance. But that's Iron Man, the Armor Trap. Love me some Iron Man. Excuse me. Next, book 3 is Stormy Weather by Carl Hyacin. And this, in this book, there's a hurricane in Florida, and these, there's con artists and thieves, all these, the scum of the earth come to take advantage. And there's this honeymooning couple who put off their plans to go to Disney World because they want to go see the devastation of the hurricane. And the husband disappears, and so the wife has to team up with some weirdo to try and find her husband. It's typical, I think. Carl Hyacin didn't leave a huge impression on me, so maybe not necessarily one of my favorites. It's obviously been a long, long time since I read it, and I haven't gone back and reread any Carl Hyacin. But they were entertaining. He's usually pretty funny. It's always just a crazy cast of characters and crazy things happening. Speaking of not remembering anything, the penultimate book is called The End of Summer by John Lowry Lamb. And this is about a 12-year-old named, I've checked my notes, Nick Harper. And he is dealing with the death of his father and grievous injury of his mother in a car accident. And there's a voice talking to him from an ancient Indian burial ground. I remember absolutely nothing about this book. Now, a lot of these books, when I'll look them up on Amazon or Goodreads to jog my memory, and I did that with this, and I still remember absolutely nothing about it. Which, depending on how you look at it, I obviously don't remember, what a great book, but I also am not thinking, I don't remember it because it was so horrible. So it must have just been fine. It just didn't leave an impression. But it's The End of Summer, John Lowry Lamb. And then finally, the last book that I read in October of 1995 was The Ultimate Silver Surfer, edited by Stan Lee. Look at that beautiful cover. I love good comic book art. I love that cover. This is a collection of short stories, original short stories. Even the very first story is a retelling of Silver Surfer's origin. But you got some pretty good authors in here. You've got, let's see, here we go. What was I looking for? Keith R.A. DeCandido, Steve Resnick Tem, Christopher Golden, and Jose R. Nieto, and where's Craig Shaw Gardner. A lot of good stories, cool stories. You got stuff with Mephisto and Thanos, and a story about a woman that's obsessed with this. Excuse me, very tired. Woman who's obsessed with the Silver Surfer. And as I said earlier, when you have prose stories based on comic book stuff, it's a mixed bag. But I remember this having some really good stuff in it. I liked these ultimate books that were, they're just anthologies, basically theme anthologies. Ultimate Spider-Man we went over before. Ultimate Silver Surfer, I think, all the Ultimate Supervillains. But they're nice, big trade paperbacks. Oh, and there's nice illustrations inside. I think each story has at least one illustration. Bunch of different artists. So, cool. Good stuff. Another one I'd like to reread, despite the hundreds and hundreds of books I already have to read that I've never read yet. But that's it. That was the last book that I read in October of 1995. Pretty light month. Doing a lot of volunteering for the blood bank. Going out with somebody new. So, excuse me. Although technically, I read more books in November and December, and I was still dating that person. And even January, although things were already going downhill by then. Anyway, 5 books. There you go. Question for this video. I can't remember if I've asked this before. I kind of feel like I might have, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you read a book and don't like it, are disappointed in it, don't think it's very good, however you want to put it, do you ever give it a second chance? My answer is yes. And it's been a mixed bag. I seem to want to use that phrase multiple times in this video. I've mentioned before the very first Dean Koontz book I ever read was Shattered. I did not like it. It was years before I read any Dean Koontz again. And then I was really digging the stuff I started reading by him. And so I went back and reread Shattered. Still couldn't stand it. On the other hand, a book that's eventually going to come up here, I believe it was Practical Demon Keeping by Christopher Moore. I think that was the one. I read it and didn't really dig it. But then when I think it was Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, came out, I wanted to give that a try and loved that book. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. I went back and reread Practical Demon Keeping and I really liked it. So it's possible I just was in the wrong mood. The biggest one I've mentioned before is Pet Sematary. I've been saying for decades and decades that it was the second most boring book I've ever read. But I decided to give it another try last year, maybe the year before, and now it's one of my favorite Stephen King books. I loved it. So my question again, do you give books a second chance? If something, you've read something, you didn't like it, but sometime later, something gets in your head and you're like, you know what, maybe I'll give that another try. Is that something that you do? Or do you not waste, well, I don't want to say waste your time, although you might think it's a waste of time. I don't know. Just let me know in the comments below. And if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is EricSmith5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. Yep, that's all I've got for you this week. So until next week, read more books.